If you like to eat your sandwiches before they've been fucked, then you've come to the right place. This is America's most familiar podcast, The Pod People. I'm Matisse Van Rossum, and I was doing an erotic dance for my friends, but you've ruined it.
I'm Cleveland Mosier, and we're werewolves, not swearwolves.
I'm Ben Sheets, the poker.
The
poking.
poker and the stoker. And this evening, we're coming at you to talk about a very fun and delightful film from 2014 called What We Do in the Shadows, written and directed by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement of Flight of the Conchords fame, starring both those gentlemen as well as Corey Gonzalez McCure and Johnny Brugge. And it is the story of some vampires sharing a house in Wellington, New Zealand, and their general foibles and fumblings.
Mockumentary is the word.
Yes. It is a mockumentary, and it did go on to create the spin-off television show of the same title that by the time this is out, will have just wrapped up its second season. And that's why I picked this movie this week, because we've been talking about so many exhausting, dour movies lately, like The Greasy Strangler and The House That Jack Built, and, just real bummers. And, I was getting a little bit of the quarantine blues, and I figured, hey, let's talk about something fun,
upbeat
and upbeat and delightful.
Upbeat horror is a thing, and it's time.
It is.
Yeah, and I think I'll definitely be going that route as well for my next pick, but more on that later.
So this movie, as I mentioned, came out in 2014. I've seen it several times now, and it is one of my favorite horror mockumentaries, just one of my favorite mockumentaries in general. I think it's a very, very funny film.
Yeah, it plays off the classic tradition of, a bunch of improv
Yes.
taken and pieced together into something that works as a whole.
So it's essentially a documentary crew following around some vampires and delving into their hidden world and seeing how they are handling modern times as several 100-year-old beings.
I love how the premise itself, breaks one of the vampire rules of, masquerade. Vampires have that same, the first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about vampires, kind of situation. Yeah. And instead of just trying to hand wave that away, they kind of lean into that. And it's sort of one of the recurring jokes is that.
Well, I would say telling people that you're a vampire that probably shouldn't know you're a vampire is one of the central themes of this movie.
Yeah, it's definitely a big callback joke and a great one.
I love how they introduced that too, with intro cards saying all of the crew is wearing cross necklaces and have agreed to not be eaten.
Yes, they set that up very nicely. So our this is very much a character-driven film, so I think we should break down the characters a little bit. We have Viago, who is played by Taika Waititi, who is kind of a old-school, foppish dandy vampire. We have Vladislav, played by Jermaine Clement, who is
Flight of the Conchords.
Yes, as I
fame.
mentioned, Flight of the Conchords fame, and lots of other stuff. His comedy backlog is pretty huge. He's a Vlad the Impaler type of vampire, Vlad the Poker, as he was called.
I love that. That's probably one of my favorite character bits in there. They could have just stopped it at haha, vampire mockumentary, but they still did their homework and had a Vlad the Impaler character from Wakalia and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I mean, the whole point of the movie is to satirize the vampire tropes. Pretty much every good old fashioned vampire trope is on display here, turning into bats, having to be invited in to enter a building, being able to hypnotize, being sort of sexual deviants.
Getting burnt by sunlight.
Having beef with werewolves. It's all there, but it's modernized. But before we continue with that, just to lay out our last couple of main characters, the youngest of the three is Deacon, who is they call him kind of the hip young bad boy vampire, but he's 183 years old. So like young to them, but still very old. And then a big crux of the movie is that they are sort of inducting a new vampire into their group. Nick, who is a brand new vampire. We see him get turned early in the movie.
Sort of a bro-y character.
Yes, and one of my favorite characters who doesn't actually have any dialogue is their fourth flatmate, Peter. Peter, who is your classic Nosferatu rat-like kind of vampire.
Played by Ben Fransham, who actually looks pretty young on his IMDb.
Oh yeah, well I mean he's in heavy makeup, of course. Yes. But I love Peter because he never says anything, and he's like the scariest. He lives in the basement in like this stone coffin.
Just straight up Nosferatu.
Yeah, we see like he's the most the voracious hunter. I love how Deacon talks about his own turning a couple of hundred years ago. It's like he was walking by a castle and a horrible bat-like creature swooped down and dragged him off into the castle and drained him of blood and then forced him to drink his own blood, and then says, and it was Peter, and we're still friends to this day.
Yeah, I love how they're friends with Peter just because, multiple of them have been turned by Peter.
Yes.
Like, Nick was also turned by
Yes.
Peter, which I find...
Peter is, as they mention, is 8,000 years old. Has been around for a hot minute. And yeah, he's kind of notorious for, like, just turning people for no reason. Because Nick is brought to their house as a sort of sacrifice by Deacon's familiar. She brings them people that she doesn't like, and of course her whole thing as a familiar is after some years of good service, Deacon is supposed to turn her into a vampire. So then the fact that Nick gets turned instead is
she's so livid about it. I love that. Like one of my favorite little interview sequences where I think she just straight up says, like, if I had a dick, I'd have been a vampire, years ago. It's like their little fucking fraternity, and like she keeps getting put on the sideline. Fun little dig at patriarchy. Yeah, I enjoyed that. Like even vampires are fucking boys clubs. Just can't get a win.
Yes, exactly. I love the scene where like she goes to meet Deacon in the vampire club, which is really funny because it's like you think of vampire club and you think of like Blade, you think of like the sexy, like cool goth nightclub.
A lot of black leather
and stuff like that.
Eyeliner.
They walk into the one bar in Wellington that's owned and operated by vampires, so they don't have to be invited to come in. And it's just like this total dumpy ass dive bar. Like there's like 3 people in there. It's just like so dead.
And they're so proud of it. Like
right, exactly. But when Jackie goes to see Deacon there, she's like, it's been a few years and I feel like I've really reached my best me, so I'd really like to be turned soon before I get much older. And he just like completely brushes her off.
I love how they carry that trend over into the TV show too. Like,
yes,
Guillermo is one of my favorite characters on the show.
Yes, Guillermo the familiar on the TV show is much more central to the plot than Jackie is in this movie, and I think that's okay. Mm-hmm. I like the human perspective, because it's nice to have in this. You have Nick as somewhat of like the grounding human perspective because he's in the midst of his transformation into a vampire. So once Peter turns him, he sort of like takes the other 3 out and about and like shows them sort of how to interact with the rest of society. Still not very well because he himself is kind of a loser.
My favorite character though is Nick's friend Stu. One of the main human characters in the movie. Just a normal dude.
Yeah, completely innocuous, boring. He doesn't have many lines. The recurring gag is that, like, they just keep having him tell other vampires, like, what he does, and he just goes into, like, rambling about working as, like, a systems analyst or something, just, like, boring garbage.
Like, almost the precursor to, like, the energy vampire thing that they play up on the show.
But even though he's so innocuous and boring, everybody still likes him more than Nick, which is, I think, a really funny gag that all of the vampires love Stu, and they love to have Stu hanging around, and he shows them all kinds of stuff like how to use YouTube and Skype and shit like that, and how to watch a video of a sunrise online because they can't see a real sunrise. But Stu is just, he's great. He's a total ambient character. He doesn't do anything, but he's always just kind of there, and everyone loves him for some reason.
I think, like, part of it too is, like, these vampires are, like, so desperate for new human interaction,
right?
And probably have forgotten that about themselves. So they've sort of been reminded of like new personalities and seeing new people because they don't really have the opportunities to go out and meet new people very often. So, like, bringing even this, like, really boring guy into the fold is, like, this really fascinating thing for them. That's cute.
And, of course, like, the comedy in this movie is fish out of water kind of scenario. Like, these old, mystical, monstrous creatures trying to coexist in, like, modern New Zealand. Maybe not necessarily the most original premise, but I think there's a lot of really good gags that come from it, especially because, like, vampire shit is mad overdone these days, you know? So it's nice to see something that takes all of those familiar tropes and has some kind of twist on them.
Well, and the thing is, too, like, vampires as a genre tend to be very self-serious.
Yes.
Look at stuff like Interview with a Vampire, for example. This movie really points its finger at, you know, how goofy a lot of those elements are when you kind of look at them critically.
Yes, it desexifies vampires in many ways.
And not only does it do that, but I think it also makes fun of other fake documentary shows. I think that this parodies The Office really well, because the format, I think if I had to pick a, like, show format that it most closely mirrors, it would probably be The Office. Like, even for the film, the little cutaways to the characters, like in the side interviews, the audio over the top, the flow of it is all very similar to, like, an episode of The Office. It all feels like very, like, paced out the same way. I love that about it because it's taking those ideas that I find, you know, like, as I get older, to be a little drab and boring, and giving them a lot more variety. And honestly, too, like, giving us moments that I think feel even more genuine than some of those shows, for as, like, goofy and wacky because the premise is these, like, weird vampires.
That's interesting that you compare the two, because I don't know if I would make that comparison. I think this movie feels more in the realm of, like, Christopher Guest movies like Spinal Tap or Best in Show, where, like, so much of it is based off of improv and quotable moments. The serious elements of stuff like The Office, when there are some, I don't think that really transfers over to
You're saying improv a lot. To me, like, it seems like a lot of, like, crafted dialogue, because, like, they're doing their homework on some of the stuff, and, like,
they shot like 250 hours for this movie.
Really?
Cut it down to like 90 minutes. So
I wonder if that was part of the decision to later spin it off into a show, just in seeing, like, how much material they could get out of it.
Definitely.
Being like, wow, 250 hours, and I'm sure some of it was not good, but and you know, like, and like, even watching the show, I have been very pleasantly surprised how well the shtick carries on.
It has good longevity.
Thank you. How much longevity it has, because, you know, I love this movie, but it's only like an hour and a half, and when I heard they were making a show, I was like, is that gonna be funny enough to do, like, an extended show without getting tired?
Even
There's a lot of ways
the
it could've
first
gone wrong.
couple episodes when it first came out, I was a little hesitant because, you know, while it was funny, I had the feeling that these characters would overstay their welcome. But I think the magic of both the show and the film are not necessarily in the characters, but in the quotable, funny gags, you know? And I think,
I mean, I absolutely agree with you. There are a lot of quotable, funny gags, but I like the characters are probably my favorite thing about the movie.
Same.
And the show.
That's definitely what I find the most compelling.
well, what I mean by that is the characters on their surface are fairly one note
Oh, sure.
for the most part. And they get the mileage out of that because of, you know, the gags they put characters into.
And you know, I think it's appropriate because these characters are all very stuck in their ways because they are hundreds of years old and they can't sort of evolve with society because their survival depends upon secrecy. So I think that there's so much mileage to be gained from like shoving modern things at them. Just like the very premise of like a bunch of vampires having to be roommates. Like some of the earliest gags in this movie are them arguing over their like chore wheel that they've created that is like this badly cut out and like colored pieces of paper that with their names on them that they can like spin for different chores, but they're angry at Deacon because he hasn't done the dishes in 5 years. And so and it cuts over and there's just 5 years worth of dishes that are just covered in blood stacked up there, which like of course begs the question. It's like, what are vampires using dishes for anyway? They get their sustenance straight from the tap,
we
so to
see
speak.
like bits of blood like caked on the dishes.
Oh, the dishes are covered in blood.
Yeah.
But like the idea of eating blood off of a plate
dish.
is like really funny too. I think the only time we ever see them use the dishes is when they bring in Nick and the other girl in the first place to
have some basghetti.
some basghetti. How the fuck is that gag so goddamn funny?
Every time it got a laugh out of me.
This is my favorite trick. We present our guest with a plate of basghetti. And then I will say, why don't you eat some basghetti? Please, Nick, eat some basghetti. I didn't realize you enjoyed eating worms, Nick.
No.
They are worms.
There's worms wiggling around on my plate.
It's worm-like, but not actually worm.
We stole that idea from the Lost Boys.
Because like there's the playoff of like the quote like old way to pronounce spaghetti, and it's just another way of showing like how out of touch they are.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Because
I'm pretty sure also like that's not true or something. Like I read something about that recently, but I forget what.
nobody calls spaghetti basghetti.
Well, I don't think no one ever did.
I don't think anybody ever did either.
Well, what's really funny is later on Nick mistakes it
for
because
biscotti.
For biscotti.
Yes. Or I don't think it's Nick, but somebody else does. Is like, yeah, they tried to offer me. I think they tried to offer me biscotti.
Oh, maybe a stew.
It might have been stew. I thought that was a really good callback too. Like that whole gag in general, just like them hypnotizing Nick into thinking that his plate of spaghetti is full of worms, and then convincing him that his dick has turned into a snake.
Nick, how does it feel to have a snake for a penis?
Jackie, my penis has disappeared. There's a cobra snake.
No one's going to mistake your penis for a cobra neck, okay? Believe
What do you
you
put on
me.
my spaghetti?
No, it is just a normal penis.
I'm out.
Josephine, you like biscotti?
That kind of stuff is like, I think it's funny because of how childish it is.
Oh, yeah.
That like these several 100-year-old creatures are still playing like juvenile gags.
Oh yeah, well it's like it's so delightfully like opposed to the image we often have in our head of like the Bela Lugosi, like I don't drink wine vampires that are all fancy and shit,
Right.
still acting kind of like broy from their own time period. There's almost more realism in that to a degree. It's almost more believable than just Bela Lugosi,
Yeah.
you know, like still being like fancy and like this many years on.
It's exactly like the point Ben made a few minutes ago that it's all about like removing the self-serious nature from vampires.
Yes.
And showing that like inherently this cultural picture that we have of vampires is very silly. at its core when you have to pardon the pun, when you shine the light on it, it actually
the light.
It becomes hard to take it seriously.
Yes.
And
vampires are people too.
We've even talked about that other times in like more self-serious vampire movies. This was before your time on the show, Cleveland, but was that fucking one with Udo Kier, produced by Andy Warhol?
Blood for Dracula
or something like that, which is similarly like very self-serious, but corny because of very campy because of how self-serious it is. I just love the just stripping away of that self-seriousness and just laying bare how dumb and goofy these characters are. Vlad in particular is very funny because he has sort of like lost his mojo over the centuries
because of the beast.
Because of his nemesis, the Beast, which we find out later is just his ex-girlfriend, which is very funny, very funny. And that he's been calling her the Beast and talking about his many battles with the Beast.
The funniest part is every time they mention the Beast, they show this really crude drawing,
like medieval drawing of like
it's like an old walnut ink illustration.
Yeah, it's like a little, but it's like a little potato thing with like chicken legs and just a dick hanging off of
its chest.
Off of its chest. Yeah, I love that.
You know, say though is I'm sure that they just found that in the book somewhere.
Oh
like,
yeah, totally.
Like most of the paintings on the show and in the film as well are like just like relatively known pieces in classicism, and they've photo edited in like little things or like painted in stuff, which is way funnier to me in some cases. Like they made a number of their own, like the any of the images of the main characters are usually like just their own, but a lot of the other like little side ones and stuff are like known sourced pieces, and it's funnier for that, like for me being able to like to recognize some of them.
Yeah, that's a very specifically niche thing for people like you who have such a vast knowledge of art history. A lot of it is stuff that the average person, and myself included, would not recognize. But I do think like that kind of stuff, even if you don't recognize it, is a nice attention to detail.
Oh, yeah.
It sort of helps the characters feel their age, like seeing these old school like paintings or medieval drawings of
Goya with like Jupiter
them,
eating his son and stuff, which has I don't think anything to do with vampires, but it certainly looks vampiric.
It's macabre, you know.
Exactly,
there's a lot of macabre art in this movie, and I mean, of course, like the characters are very as vampires, they are very edgy, but Vlad losing his mojo, to go back to that, produces some of my favorite gags in the movie. I think of stuff when like he's walking around outside trying to like hypnotize people to let him into their house, and he's just like standing outside the window, just like people watching TV, just going, "See me." See me. And it's like, oh, they can't see me from this angle. I have to go to a different window. See me.
It reminds me of the bit in Ed Wood where like the elderly Bela Lugosi is like watching Elvira, and he starts doing like the hypnotic like hand movement at the screen.
Another fantastic example, also combining like the art history stuff, is they talk about how Vlad used to be like a great shapeshifter, but now he can't get any of the faces right. So they just use like a lot of like very old paintings where like artists could not quite make animals look right, which are it's my favorite genre of artwork, is weird looking animals.
I mean, shoot, like it's probably top 3 for me too. Like wrong dogs are hilarious. Wrong horses are weird. I love it.
Wrong cats are my favorite.
Oh, so good.
And when Nick is trying to escape from the house after the dinner party scene, and he's just like running through the dark house and just runs across a cat that just has Vlad's face, is if not my favorite visual gag in the movie.
It's so good. It's so good. It's like etched into my mind. And it really does look like some of those weird cats. Because like
It does,
those
yeah.
artists, because like to those artists, like small credit, like they couldn't like get photos of these creatures. And in some cases, like when it came to like with them trying to draw lions and stuff, they were just drawing pictures of like other people's pictures of lions or like written descriptions. But even with like cats and dogs, like it's really hard to get a cat or dog to sit still for an oil painting. That's
true.
Like,
That's true.
Like, that's not an easy feat. And so like you can just imagine these poor artists.
Wing it.
Yeah, you do. And the thing about it is like whenever you wing it, like you tend to incorporate a lot of your own face into things. Like you'll see it like with like artists a lot when they're doing portraits will incorporate some of their own facial features into portraits as well. So it just kind of happens like naturally. So that's sort of one of the reasons why you have those like weird wrong dogs in history, and I love it.
I love that this movie gives like a lore reason for that, and that it's just that it's vampires who can't quite get the face right. It's a very funny gag.
It's so good.
Man, so much of what I want to talk about in this movie is literally just like listing gags. That make me laugh.
Like we're gonna avoid just like doing just like, hey, remember this scene?
It's not a particularly like narratively deep film by any means.
There are a few thematic things though, like we could bring up. Like they do a fun job of like with Nick's character of comparing like becoming a vampire with coming out. And they carry that on a little bit in the show too. And I think that's fun. I think largely thanks to things like Interview with the Vampire and like some of the more Anne Ricey stuff, the LGBT community has sort of developed like a small love for vampires because of that same sort of like that transition, sort of phase and stuff that you have to go through.
But yeah, bro, vampires are gay as hell, and I say that in the best way.
Oh yeah, with love, with
Yeah,
only with
absolutely.
love, and I love that like that we get to see that through Nick's sort of broy perspective. Is that we get this like this one interview moment where it's almost like a coming out tale, but it's from this like super broy like hetero dude.
Well, yeah, and there's like that the relationship that he has with Stu. It's like, he's my best friend, so I'm not gonna eat him no matter how much I want to. It's like,
Oh yeah, like super homoerotic. Like,
right.
and of course like that theme has always existed with vampires. And I think too that is it Jackie? What is
Jackie is
Familiar?
Deacon's familiar.
Yeah, like I think like Jackie even says that as well. It's like it's just all a bunch of like broy like homoerotica like bullshit. Which is why I loved the incorporation of getting a female perspective on the show with
Oh yeah, with Nadja.
Yeah,
she's
with
she's
Nadja.
one of my favorite characters. She's the best.
Agreed. It's so nice to get like a more female perspective on the show, and like that was a smart move. Was a very smart move on their part.
Well, to go back to the movie, because we will talk about the show, because I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah.
I think that the way that they play that as sort of a foil to the werewolves is really good, because the vampires are these very like foppish dandies that dress in like frilly lace and capes and stuff, and
give no fucks about people.
And
like
give no
people are
fucks.
food. That's it.
Right. And the werewolves who they keep bumping into and having beef with are like soccer lads.
Yeah.
They're all just like bros, but also they're way less their relationship with each other is like way less toxic.
Well, because
than
they treat their werewolfism like they're in an AA group.
Right.
Like it's an Alcoholics Anonymous thing. Like they're trying to live like as straight edged of a life as they can, because they can still interact with human society. They can go out in daylight. They're still like relatively acclimated, and adjusted, but they have this one problem, so they have to like treat it like an AA thing. So they almost feel like a bunch of like soccer lads who are just trying to get back on the straight and narrow.
It's definitely a pack mentality.
Yes.
And I love how they make transforming into a werewolf seem like the biggest inconvenience.
Yes, I love that.
Like the whole scene of the full moon coming out and them making sure they're chained to the right tree, and they
you know how big you get when you transform. That tree's gonna snap like a twig. Find a bigger tree.
and like taking expensive clothes off so you don't rip it.
Oh, and yeah, like why there's the whole little back and forth about why one of them didn't wear a tracksuit. He's like, those jeans, you can say goodbye to those jeans. They're going to be absolutely ruined.
Yeah, might as well take them off now.
It's like you wear the tracksuit because your body expands when you transform. And I mean,
just the imagery of like werewolves in tracksuits is great.
And yeah, I mean, it's fucking fantastic. I mean, I'm all about the tracksuit life. I'm trying to buy more tracksuits this year, but a lot of the comedy in those scenes too is helped by the fact that the alpha werewolf is played by Rhys Darby. Speaking of werewolves, the dog just smacked Ben's mic.
Like, God damn it.
But yeah, the alpha werewolf is played by Rhys Darby, who is the travel agent in Flight of the Conchords. He's a frequent Jermaine Clement collaborator, and he's very funny.
He's fairly versatile. He's been in a number.
He's been
of
in a lot of
roles.
stuff. Yeah, he's had a lot of like small parts and things. I feel like he's kind of underrated as like a more prominent character.
Yeah, he's definitely a great comedy character actor. I think part of it is he has the improv chops. One of my favorite scenes is when the werewolves are in a pack near the end, and he's telling jokes, and they're all laughing, and then he interrogates them as to why they're laughing. And they can't really give him a good answer.
He's trying to like assert himself as the
Because he's the alpha.
member.
He's the alpha, yeah.
And he emphasizes that he's the alpha by telling everyone that he's the alpha.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he's great, and the whole swearwolves gag is very funny as well. He doesn't want one of the werewolves keeps in their first encounter with our vampires, cussing at the vampires, and Rhys Darby's character's just like, hey, we're werewolves, not swearwolves. Watch your language.
One thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is the whole premise of this is, fish out of water, vampires, acclimating into society. And in the climax of this movie, you get the reversal of it in a really interesting way with Stu.
Great point.
Going to the ball and seeing how, him being a fish out of water is the only human at a ball full of
vampires, witches, and zombies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is very funny, and I love the interactions of how the whole crew tries to defend Stu as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that scene actually plays for tension quite well in a comedic movie, because it's like everybody starts realizing all at once that Stu is a human and
he's a lamb in a den of lions.
Right, exactly. And like, even though we as the audience maybe don't have so much attachment to Stu because he has very few lines.
We're worried for the vampire's happiness.
Yes, exactly. They, Stu.
They don't want to see Stu
is
eaten.
important. Stu is important to them. So like
Some
that
sort of following by proxy is the audience.
And of course, that scene also has Vlad confronting yet again the Beast.
The Beast.
His girlfriend his ex-girlfriend Pauline. I love when he finds out that she's the guest of honor to the party and he doesn't want to go, and we see him and he's all like shriveled up and like withered and got like dry cracked hair and pasty skin and he's just like been totally drained of his vitality at the thought of his ex-girlfriend getting guest of honor over him. Leave me to do my dark bidding on the internet. Another extremely stupid joke that always makes me laugh.
Oh yeah. They're just like so many small moments, little bits of attention that just like subvert that idea of like the fancy vampire. You've got like Taika Waititi like masturbating in his coffin, and
that's a really good B plot too. Like his old love, the reason he came to New Zealand in the first place, but his old familiar put the wrong postage on his coffin when he shipped him, so it took him 18 months to get there. Oh man, yeah, and he prints out the picture that she gave him in the locket and tapes it to the inside of his coffin so he can jerk off to it. Well, and then of course the really nice joke there at the very end is he goes back to her as a 90-something-year-old woman and turns her into a vampire.
My favorite part of that whole gag is right at the end, like the last thing we get before the credits is, she's talking about how it'll be pretty nice to be a vampire, and it just lingers on her after she says that, and there's almost a look of realization that she's gonna stay that age forever.
It's almost like the end of The Graduate, where both of them are sitting there and the camera holds on them just long enough where they both kind of realize like, oh shit, did we make a mistake? Yeah, that's a really good bit.
This is my favorite Taika Waititi movie.
Oh, yeah, same.
I think he's a really great director. I wasn't the biggest fan of Jojo Rabbit personally. I thought it was pretty decent. But The Hunt for the Wilder People is fantastic. And Thor Ragnarok is pretty decent.
Thor Ragnarok
it's one of the better, I think, Marvel films.
Surprisingly good for a Marvel movie.
You know why?
Yeah.
Because it knows what it is. Taika Waititi went in knowing what to do, and also Thor is one of the most fish out of watery characters. I think Thor is at his best when he is sort of unsure of where he is, in the first one. He's doing that whole get my horse, shit.
Yes.
It's pretty funny. Those are good bits. So yeah, Taika I think just brought all the right things that people wanted to see.
It has a good sense of humor, and comic books need to be campy, and comic books need to, similarly to What We Do in the Shadows, not be so damn self-serious.
Yeah. Yes.
And
comic books, graphic novels.
Yeah, and I think that the reason that Thor Ragnarok is decent as a Marvel film is because Taika Waititi knows that.
Yeah, it does what it's setting out to do, just be a fun popcorn
Ragnarok
movie.
certainly falls into some of the Marvel trappings at times.
Sure.
But gotta give him a little bit of props for letting a comedy director do a comedy movie, rather than
absolutely.
pigeon it into a strict superhero.
Well, it's just like we talked about not long ago when we talked about Blade 2. Just like Guillermo del Toro, it's like Taika Waititi's a comic book fan. He knows the tone of the movie that he's supposed to be making, and he does it right. On the subject of Blade, another one of my favorite bits in this movie is when they say that vampires love Wesley Snipes. They hate Blade, but love Blade, but they love Wesley Snipes, and they never explain that.
Well, I don't think they have to. It's just Wesley Snipes is so goddamn charming. You can't not love the man, even if he is a vampire
Wesley
killer.
Snipes?
He's
I love Wesley Snipes.
I think that's all there is to it.
I love Wesley Snipes' cameo on the show What We Do in the Shadows when they go to the whole Vampire Council episode, and Taika Waititi's there, and Jermaine Clement, and all of these other vampires from other movies.
Yeah, but do they get Wesley Snipes?
Yeah, the whole gag is he's on Skype and the connection is really bad.
Yeah, but that was Wesley Snipes.
Yes, it was 100% Wesley Snipes.
God damn, I thought they just got a Wesley Snipes lookalike.
No,
that's pretty great.
No,
the quality is really bad. That's the whole joke. So I wasn't totally sure.
Yes, it's definitely Wesley Snipes. But I had forgotten about the vampires love Wesley Snipes joke in this movie. So I think that looking forward at that episode of the show, that's a really nice callback, especially considering that they have Viago and Vlad and Deacon at the Vampire Council anyway. So it's we're already seeing these other characters. And then even though the vampires love Wesley Snipes, Blade exists in this world, which is real life Blade. Oh, that's pretty fucking good, man. Do you want to talk a little bit about the show?
Yeah, it's time. Perfect cast.
Yes.
perfect, ideal. Everyone is amazing on it. Like I can't stop gushing about it. I think the cameos they get are fabulous. Mark Hamill recently, like just doing his Joker voice in like a Spirit Halloween like vampire costume was a stitch. Matt Berry, one of my favorite comedy actors.
I love him in everything. They couldn't have got a better person for this show.
I'm such like a Matt Berry fan. Like I even like Toast of London, like to a degree. I can't get enough of him. Like he's so funny. He's so much fun to imitate too. Just like the father bits from IT Crowd, and like
he's great on Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
Oh
yes.
yeah,
another one of my favorite roles that he's done. I similarly shared a couple of concerns through the first few episodes of the show because there's a lot of like repeated gags. I mean, I know it's a spin-off of the movie, so they want to get the mileage out of those things, but I was a little bit worried. It's like, okay, are you just going to do this? Is your whole thing going to be that you do the same gags from the movie? And thankfully, it outgrew that pretty quickly.
One great example of that is the energy vampire.
Yes.
You know, when that's first introduced, I thought...
Colin.
Colin Robinson. Because they always refer to him by his first and last name.
Yeah.
God, the episode where he gets the A plot line and becomes a manager is God, it's so good.
That's the thing. Like, at first viewing, you think, oh, that's a one-off joke. How much mileage can you really get out of,
Turns out
a one-dimensional character like
Turns
that?
out a bunch.
And they get a lot of mileage out of it. And it's not because of the character necessarily, but in the environments and the gags they put him into.
And that he always like shows up when they need him the least. Like usually when there's, they're trying to solve some kind of problem, and then Colin Robinson shows up and just sucks all of the energy out of the room and makes it even harder to solve the problem. Like that's
working
really
harder, hardly working. I also love Kayvan Novak's Nandor character, who gets a lot of screen time. Like
he's very similar to Taika Waititi's character in the movie.
But they give him like a bit of like an Ottoman arc, which is fun. Like you get some Ottoman Turk, sort of like influence thrown in, which is a
he's
delight.
not just a European vampire.
That adds to some of the fun and lots of new excuses for paintings. But Laszlo and Nadja's relationship and like their couple therapy, like as vampire stuff, like has definitely not gotten old for me in any way yet. And also Guillermo's arc, like with him like slowly maybe becoming a vampire hunter. I'm loving that.
Well, when he learns that he has Van Helsing blood, and so he inadvertently kills vampires.
And, he also when he first learns it, he thinks it's a coincidental name and that Van Helsing is fiction. And he has to slowly figures oh, wait a minute, I'm a familiar to vampires. Maybe he is real.
Right. No, he's really great. They've gotten a lot of mileage out of the familiar character as well.
And that trend of familiars continually being turned down to become vampires, it will not get old for me anytime soon. They can keep running that gag.
Yeah, the idea of how underappreciated they are despite how hard they work. Like some of the bleakest stuff in the movie is Jackie out in the middle of the night spraying blood off of the driveway after Peter has grabbed Nick.
Cleaning the disgusting bathroom.
The blood drenched bathroom, just and they do it because they want to live forever. Or when
and it feels like someone just waiting for that raise and keep getting told it's coming and just keep getting put back on it. Very relatable.
When Stu teaches Viago how to use Skype, and the first person he Skypes is his old familiar back in Germany who's 90 something now, and is so are you gonna make me a vampire now? I haven't done anything with my life. I've been waiting to become a vampire. And Viago just hangs up on it.
I love how they get even more mileage out of familiars in the show. How we see gags of other familiars.
Yes.
For example, there's a hip vampire club. Unlike the really bad one in the movie, there's a hip downtown Manhattan.
It's like on Staten
The
Island
one
or
where
something.
Nick Kroll is the no, the club is in Manhattan.
Oh, you're right. It's
They
very
live in
specifically
Staten Island.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, it is like a sexy vampire.
Yeah,
style
and
club.
then they have like a broom closet where the familiars just hang out in a little circle.
And it's also the bathroom, and there's just buckets of piss on the floor.
One of the familiars is just a cat.
Yes! Oh my god, that made me laugh so hard. Oh, fuck. So here's a question for you guys, because we've all been keeping current with the show, and we just rewatched this movie. With both those things being fresh in your minds, which one do you prefer, the film or the show?
Oh, well, I mean, the show is already standing on its giant shoulders.
I mean, of course, the show wouldn't exist without the film, but I guess that question kind of extends to, does the show improve on the film's premise?
I think so, because that premise works like in the same nature as like The Office or Parks and Rec or any of those interview style shows. That format works really good in half-hour segments. I love that about it. We get more of it, and they're able to run arcs out, over multiple episodes. So we're just getting more character development out of it, and it's managing to maintain that mileage. So, I mean, I'm gonna go with the show. Also, just like I have such a deep love for like Matt Berry and like the rest of the cast. But I mean, I also love Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement and the rest as well. But they're both great, and it's like picking kids, like it's pretty difficult. But I'm gonna go with the show.
I actually agree. I think the movie has such a chaotic, freewheeling energy because it's so improv heavy that, the show feels much more structured in a lot of ways. But I think that works to its benefit, actually, because you get more good gags. The situations they're put into every episode are great.
I think that if you had asked me before we rewatched the movie, I would have said the movie hands down. But I think I'm actually going to agree with you guys. And I think that the show, like, it takes everything that the film established so well and takes it farther. And all of the characters are analogous to the characters in the movie. They have similar character types. And as much as I love Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi, they got good actors to sort of carry that torch.
Well, and I think on top of it, one of the big things is the show, at least the first season, was for the most part directed and written by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi,
right. Yeah.
Which is good because it captures the same, spirit of the movie. And while it's more structured, it's written by the same people that are riffing through the movie.
It feels like they're finally getting to do things that they wanted to do in the movie.
Yeah, there's the budget.
They have more of a budget for sure for the show. It's an FX thing, so they've got money in it, obviously. I would agree. I think that like the show really just like takes a really solid, fun, lighthearted premise and turns it into something that has surprising legs.
Yeah, and I think it just came at a really great time for me. I had just tried to rewatch Parks and Rec recently, and like the politics and like a few of the other things, oof, and it was too hard and I couldn't, and like it was kind of sad too because I still love a lot of those old characters from the show, but it's hard to put a modern perspective on that one, and like same with The Office, like I just kind of feel like I've outgrown it. And
I've never been into The Office.
Yeah, and I get the same kind of like character tracking. And I still get to enjoy like, oh, what's Andy gonna get up to this week, or what's Ron gonna get up to? I get to ask that about Guillermo and Laszlo and the rest, and so I still get my comfy show, but also it's got a little bit of that edge to it, and I think also lasting power.
Also, like, it's very much benefited by being an FX show because they can get away with profanity. Yes. And like
they are swearwolves.
They are swearwolves in the show. Overall, I'm a big fan. I hope the show continues to keep going. They've done two very solid seasons. I think the second season improved on the first one even. Yeah, I'm just happy that this movie was a thing, so that the like as even as a jumping off point for the show, and I still love the movie. We ready to rate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and throw a rating onto it. Like, yeah, the movie is fantastic. It always makes me laugh. I laugh at the same gags. One of my favorite mockumentaries. I will say one thing to backpedal real quick.
Sure.
About the show that I do prefer about the movie is the setting. I know they've got budget and, you know, they're trying to make it bigger, so yeah, put it in New York, Americanize it. But I think part of the charm that the film has is it's made by dudes from New Zealand. Like, I like that it's set in New Zealand and that for like American viewers, it's a taste of like another country and culture's comedy. And I don't know. I think that's part of what's charming about the movie is that these vampires aren't in like a major city like New York or LA or London or something like that. You know, they're in Wellington and like just tucked off in a little corner of the world. But you know, yeah, this movie's fucking rules. I'm gonna give it a 4.5 out of 5. Classic.
Yeah, I'm going to mirror that in a lot of ways. I love the chaotic, freewheeling energy of this movie. It's one of the most quotable movies out there, period. The whole premise is great, and the deadpan nature of the comedy will always be funny to me. It's a 4.5 out of 5 as well for me.
Huh. I have no criticisms of this film, so I don't see any reason to not give it a 5. I adore this film for all the same reasons. I smile every time I'm reminded of it. Easy 5 from me.
All right, well, What We Do in the Shadows gets a 4.7 out of 5 pods from us. Yeah, I mean, we should mention, like, while quarantine is still happening and everybody's stuck at home and stuff, like, the show is on Hulu. You got Hulu? You haven't seen it? Watch it.
It's good to laugh.
I don't know if the movie's streaming anywhere, but if for some reason you haven't seen it, or if you're a fan of the show and haven't seen the movie that started it, you know, absolutely worth checking out. We could all use a laugh in these times. So yeah, it was nice to do that. Speaking of these times, it's time for our mid-year catch-up and what may well be our end of the year
Well, I will say there's a few films scheduled, but I'll believe it when I see it.
And
you know?
and if they come out, for lack of better things to do, we'll probably give them their own episode. So this might be the only catch-up episode that we do this year, depending on how many movies come out. And Ben, I believe you have the results of who won this contest of guesses, this battle.
Who could it be?
Who could it be?
I do indeed. Okay, so out of our 20 predictions, 5 have come out. And, 3 have been pushed to next year, and 6 have been delayed indefinitely. So
wow,
Christ.
Good thing we don't just cover current films.
Thank God.
Thank God.
Tease, you had 3 predictions correct
Okay.
out of 5. I had 3 as well, so we were tied. But inching us out was Cleveland with 4.
Woo! All
Just
right.
barely beating us out by the skin of our teeth.
So, yes, Cleveland will be curating our next episode. We're not going to tell you...
And I sure have a lot of options to fucking pick from.
Yeah, we're not going to tell you what movies those are going to be yet.
There's still some good ones, though.
You'll just have to check back next week and find out what those are. But, yeah, there's a pretty small basket of horror movies that came out this year that we didn't choose from. So, hopefully, they'll be good.
Yeah, well, hey, speaking of baskets... Is it time for our sponsor?
It sure is.
All right. Well, fortunately enough, and tangentially enough, this episode of Pod People was brought to you by Miss Bingle's Bat Baskets. What are you doing with a bat and no basket? What the fuck is that? What's that about? You need to have a basket for your bat, because anything looks cuter in a basket. So
This is true.
So what the fuck are you doing? Like, go down to your local pharmacy and get a bat basket for your bat.
Break quarantine to go down.
Yeah, it's worth it.
To go down to your pharmacy.
It's worth the risk. Side note, or in parentheses, not worth the risk. Don't break quarantine that bad. But yeah, no, go get a fucking bat basket, you lazy dick. And yeah, they're made by Miss Bingle, and deal with it.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, thanks to Miss Bingle's Bat Basket for sponsoring this classic episode of the Pod People. That'll be it for us, I think. If you like the show and you like vampires, then go on to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and a nice review. If you can also follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. Follow me on Twitter at DeepStateAussie for tweets.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
I'm occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studio as we push out the next release of our lovely game, It Stares Back. We've made good progress recently and hope to continue to do so. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more to show there soon. You can also see my work on ArtStation. Go check it out under Cleveland Mosher. That's Mosher. For some spooky, cool paintings. Also, my commissions are open, so feel free to hit me up if you want something doodled, sketched, painted, drawn, or licked. And yeah,
All right.
come on around. I'd love to help.
Cool. Well, we're pretty much halfway through 2020, maybe the worst year ever. So tune back in next week to hear about the horror movies that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, the bubonic plague was pretty bad too, but
yeah,
that was a bad year. That was a bad time.
My point is, if you go outside, wear a fucking mask.
Please.